Disc 6. Chapter 26. The Golden Rule. The great path has no gates. Thousands of roads enter it. When you pass through this gateless gate, you walk the universe alone. Muman. Watching the fire brings back memories of when I was just a regular person. I fondly recall a drinking buddy with whom I used to carry on lofty and semi-coherent philosophical discourse back in my 20s. Obeying Thoreau's precept that the big thoughts require big spaces, we would take our debates outside and shout back and forth across roaring bonfires, busy streets, still ponds, never sitting, never standing still, and never making a whole lot of sense. He was in the process of inventing a version of Christianity that suited his larger-than-life persona, and I was working through Thoreau and Whitman. When we were done with the big thoughts, we'd spin and spin until we'd fall down and cling to the earth until it stopped moving. Why? Haven't a clue. Made sense at the time. Jed? Yes, Mary. What does it mean in Zen Buddhism when they say that to achieve enlightenment, one must pass through the gateless gate? The gate refers to the barrier that stands between the unawakened mind and enlightenment. From the perspective of the person wishing to become enlightened, this gate appears enormous and impassable. It's what you see as the difference between you and me. I tend to think of it more as a series of doors, each of which must be unlocked and passed through before progress can continue. Until finally, the final door is opened, and you look back on your great journey, only to find that you never moved an inch, and that there never was a gate. No doors, no locks, not so much as a line drawn in the sand. Oh, I see. And how is that useful? Good question. I think about it for a moment. I recall my own pre-enlightened thoughts about the gateless gate. I don't believe it is. It's just something you notice once you get past it. Oh, I see. And when they talk about a finger pointing at the moon? Okay. When they talk about a finger pointing at the moon, they're saying you should look where the finger's pointing, not at the finger itself. Don't mistake the finger for the moon. I see. And how is that useful? Well, for instance, if you were to start making a big deal about me, then I would use the finger pointing at the moon thing to get you back on the right track, to put your attention back where it belongs, on the moon, not the finger. Make sense? Yes, thank you. Reading about Zen lately, Mary? Yes, because you talk about it so much. Well, use the opportunity to sharpen your sword of discrimination. Much of what you'll read about Zen is a finger pointing at the finger pointing at the moon, rather than at the moon. Keep that in mind, and let me know if you have more questions. Other questions come, and I deal with them. Kundalini, diet, psychedelic drugs, this movie, that book, this guru, that poem, this shortcut, that fad. I'm in a very relaxed state, but eventually the subject of bliss comes up and gets my juices flowing again. I know enlightenment is a state of ecstasy and bliss, begins a newcomer named Jeffrey. Excuse me, I interrupt. I mean, he replies, I know it's about, the experience of bliss, I ask. Ecstasy? Yeah, so what I was wondering... Stop. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. How many of you think that? Show of hands, please. How many of you equate enlightenment with bliss or ecstasy or whatever? Several hands go up. Mary, who was asking about Zen, doesn't raise her hand. One who I know is already beyond the first step doesn't raise her hand either, but nearly half of them do. Fuck bliss, I tell them. Bliss is for children. Bliss is for tourists, for rubes. Do you really think that spiritual enlightenment is going to be like an endless orgasm? This provokes a few muffled titters. A permanent high, heaven on earth, no more problems, no more worries, just sitting around being happy all the time? Doesn't that sound a little, I don't know, sleazy? Like all we're really doing here is trying to cop a great buzz? I pause to let them contemplate it for themselves. Enlightenment isn't a peak experience. It's not an altered state of consciousness. It's not a happily ever after fairy tale. Spiritual enlightenment means waking up. As simple and as difficult as that. Bliss is just the heaven myth repackaged for a slightly hipper crowd. Heaven on earth, heaven here and now. It's really too silly to talk about. But the larger issue here is how such a ridiculous idea got into your heads in the first place. That should be a pretty sobering question. If such a bizarre notion was so firmly rooted in your thinking, what else is in there? If your beliefs aren't your own, whose are they? Who are you? You must re-examine all of your assumptions, and only a small fraction of them are readily visible. Unchallenged beliefs can define you and determine the course of your life. Maybe the whole reason you're on this spiritual track in the first place is due to the unchallenged belief that this path leads to rapture. Maybe you don't really want to go where this really leads. Maybe you're just in it for the fairy tale. I would guess that that's true of over 95% of Western spiritual seekers. I look around and see everyone staring at me wide-eyed. Is my zipper open? Think for yourself. That's the golden rule. Think for yourself. Make it your mantra. Tattoo it on the inside of your eyelids. I perform a theatrical bow. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You've been a wonderful audience. Drive safely. Good night. They applaud on cue and begin talking among themselves, all still a bit energetically buzzed. I plop down into my chair to watch the dying embers. The light drizzle is still falling, and a constant buzz of tiny sizzles can be heard as the moisture meets the heat. I am vaguely aware of a presence somewhere behind me and assume it's Sarah. If you're too tired to talk tonight, we can get together tomorrow, I say. I'm not tired, she replies, as she approaches and sits down on the wet grass beside my chair. She pulls her legs up and wraps her arms around her knees. We watch the fire together in silence for a few minutes before she speaks. I'm afraid I might be in the wrong place, she begins. I'm not sure I'm really cut out to learn what you're teaching. That's certainly possible, I say, wondering if it isn't actually pretty likely. But no, I don't think it's likely at all. This whole thing can come off as awfully one-pointed at times, but the fact of the matter is that the pursuit of truth is in itself a lifestyle choice, and one that can be fulfilling in many ways aside from the actual achievement of the ultimate goal. This is a journey of steps, and every step is, in a very real sense, its own journey. In a way, what we're doing here is an intellectual approach to spiritual development. Do you think you'd be more comfortable with a more heart-centered approach? Of course, but I'm really asking her if she prefers the fairy tale after all. "Maybe," she says weakly. "Maybe," I echo. "But, you know, it's not an earth-shattering decision. It's not something you have to get really hung up on. My guess is that there are some things you're supposed to learn while you're with us. Maybe not everything, maybe just one or two smaller things. The universe is funny about how it puts us exactly where we need to be to pick up the next piece of the puzzle. I mentioned to you that bit about there not being any winners or losers, right?" "Yes, I remember," she says. "And here you are right now, getting a little panicky, thinking that where you are isn't where you should be. And I agree with you. Maybe you should be moving on soon. Nothing wrong with that. But I doubt that your time here was wasted, or that you don't still have something to pick up while you're here. See what I mean?" She nods to say that she understands. But as someone who spent 3/4 of his life nodding at things he didn't understand at all, I tend to observe nodding heads and muffled assents with a degree of skepticism. "How old are you, Sarah?" I asked. 20, she replies. "Well, let's take an honest look at this. First, you're not going to be crashing through the gateless gate any time soon. Is that something that weighs heavily on you? Do you feel like you have to do well or excel at this spiritual stuff?" "I don't know. Maybe." "Do you think you might be uncomfortable here because you don't feel you're progressing quickly enough?" I was above and somewhat behind her, so all I could make out was the nod, but I could tell she was getting a little emotional about it. I ask how long she's been with us, and she says about a week. I laugh. Well, there comes a point in the journey when it's very appropriate to put a lot of pressure on yourself, maybe even the kind of pressure that can break your mind and land you in an institution. She turns and looks up at me with fear in her eyes. "I wouldn't worry about that just yet," I reassure her. "Do you know what I was doing when I was 20, Sarah?" "You were probably already enlightened and teaching people like me," she answers. Now I really laugh. "Sarah, when I was 20, I was totally lame. A smart, beautiful, spiritually sophisticated girl like you wouldn't have looked at me twice. Little depth, no sense of direction, no acquaintance with spiritual matters, just flailing my way through life. The person that I was at 20 could never have found his way to this house, to this thing we have here, could never have understood it even in the broadest sense. You're light years more developed and awake than I was then. Now, that doesn't mean you'll be fully awake by the time you're 30, but who knows? Nobody knows anything." Clearly, Sarah only half believes me. "It's true," I affirm. "I didn't start getting interesting until I was nearly 30. Before that, you don't want to know." She's smiling now, a little relieved, and a little shocked to hear that someone she had placed on too high a pedestal wasn't really the product of immaculate conception. "You have many years of this spiritual adventure in front of you, probably many lifetimes. Try to take it one step at a time. Even looking 2 steps ahead can be very intimidating. Know what I mean? Breathe more deeply, drink more water, meditate more often. Take it easy. You're not struggling to climb from hell into heaven. You're just having an in-the-body experience. It's not evil. It's just life. And when it's over, you die. Easy as falling off a log." Sarah has heard this from me before, but I'm not surprised that she still believes that she's in a bad place and must get to a good one. It's easy to say that there's no race, that there are no winners or losers, but it's a whole different thing to actually get it. This is one of those icebergs